Well, it's wonderful to be here with you today, Robbie. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. I've been reading, watching, and listening to your work for some time now. You're, of course, an event design consultant and executive Zoom producer with a passion for, and I quote, creating engaging and unforgettable experiences. And I've seen that and experienced it myself. You're a best-selling author too, and your latest book, which is called Break Out of Boredom, Low-Tech Solutions for Highly Engaging Zoom Events, has been spectacularly successful. I read it, used it, and it's fantastic. So many congratulations for that. As well as other things you do. I mean, you have a portfolio career. You are a professional speaker, a Harvard Business Review contributor, and the host of the On the Schmooze podcast, which has been running since 2016. So you are far, far more expert than me in this endeavor. So we are going to talk about everything virtual, how to make it a creative, engaging, inclusive, enjoyable experience. And I know that's a hot topic for many of my listeners and viewers. And I'm super grateful you've made the time to come on the show. So welcome, Robbie.
And thank you for inviting me. This is going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's start at that position. When I talk to my clients and contacts who are working in hybrid situations, often a lot more than in the past working virtually, they often say, I just find it harder to connect to people virtually. Just paint the picture of some of what you and hear and see in terms of the challenges and problems people face working in this way.
I think that when we were all sort of forced into a space where virtual was the only option back in 2020, many of us didn't know how to adapt. And so we were using the rules and the experiences that we'd had for in-person and trying to apply them to a virtual space. We were trying to replicate what we had done previously. Doesn't work that way. It's like using the rules for one sport for another sport. It's like there's some similarity here, but not really. So we have to really understand what this tool is. And I think the challenge is that most people have not invested beyond the basics. Like they got to a rudimentary level of comfort using, for example, Zoom or any of these other platforms back in 2020, but they haven't invested the time and energy to think creatively about event design, about quality facilitation, to really understand the settings and the options and the features of these tools. So they're really boring if you leave all that off. And I also think there's a way in which we think we don't see body language. And, I am looking right at the camera right now to make as much of an impact and connect with you as much as possible. And yet I can still see you're nodding. I can still see you're encouraging me. And if I wanted to look down, I would see even more. So I have actually had some training on how to sort of particularly pay attention to people's facial expressions and the muscles they clench when they're trying to hold back anger or fear or angst. Or not even cry on camera, right? So there's a lot we can actually still get, and we show a lot in our face. So I think some of this is just people not wanting to try harder because they don't know that there's a better outcome that's possible, and that's partly why I wrote the book. I want people to know that a better outcome is possible, and our sense of this here is to get 5% better every time we host, speak, and or even participate in a virtual gathering.
Well, I mean, you've captured and digested all of it in so beautifully and brilliantly there. Let's delve into it in a bit more detail. Sure. I mean, when you hear people saying, look, I can only have a creative experience or creative type of meeting in an office, just in a nutshell, what's your reaction to that?
That's not a very creative point of view.
Fair enough. Yeah. And when people talk about, I guess the other thing I've heard is where people say, I can't have a difficult or sensitive conversation virtually. I have to be in the room with them. Again, what's your reaction to that?
One of the things I found interesting, because I do a ton of coaching and I've had some really difficult conversations virtually, is there's no interruptions. Like when you're meeting with people in person, there are these other distractions. Sometimes there are people walking by. Sometimes it's hard to find a private space. Sometimes it's awkward to pull people aside because everyone sees you pulling them aside. But if you're having a virtual call, people don't know that you're having a difficult conversation versus just a check-in call, reviewing a task list. So there's a way in which you can embrace the fact that this is happening in a completely separate environment. I've also done coaching where we've done it where other people are able to listen in. It's like a live coaching call, but I had everyone turn off their cameras and had everyone hide the non-participant videos so that you couldn't even tell they were there. And the
Yes.
intimacy, even in a space where the person being interviewed, or in say a coach, a coachee, a client, knew that other people were listening in, they still we were able to create this really close space, and the world really did fade away. And so I think we can embrace those possibilities again, knowing the settings, knowing the technology, and sort of appreciating that. I think difficult conversations are difficult, period, and there's work to be done in doing them better. But I don't think the medium is causing more or less angst. I think conversations are hard to do, and you could maybe find a way in which this could be possibly better. You also may not be in the same geographic location with a lot of the people you report to or who report to you. So are you going to wait until you do the cross Atlantic visit? Are you going to wait until you're in the same town? That's putting off a thing and maybe creating a bigger problem. We have to learn how to use this, because the more we're able to give people the feedback as needed, as opposed to building up a long list of complaints and then blindsiding people, that's never a good practice if you're trying to manage people in a human-centered way. And so it's better than a phone call. Video is better than the phone call. And if you have the ability to be in person, maybe that is a great option. But if that's not a great ability, if it's going to something that'll put off, then I think we have to learn how to use virtual.
That's such a great point. It's such a great point because the world is more. It sounds glib, doesn't it? But the world's more dynamic than it was. It feels faster. There's more often anxiety as well, as well as opportunity. It's like get on and say what you think and cut through it. Don't wait for the next formal meeting or away day in person. But one of the things you said right at the beginning was that this is a skill that you actually have to develop. It's not just something you switch on. I know, of course, your book goes into all of this in lots of great detail, but what are the main skills or features or things that people have to learn? What are the main elements, perhaps, that we can start off with?
Well, I think one is cultivating a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn, because this is something that it might be a little out of your comfort zone. Maybe you're not someone who loves technology. Communicating can be difficult, again, regardless of the conversation. So I think cultivating that sense of curiosity, wanting to learn something, seeking out the support you need, if that's what will help you get there. That's the first thing. Then there's all the technical pieces like decent lighting. A way to remember this is lights, camera, you. So the light should always be in front of you. Then the camera comes next, then you. The light should not be like right now. I actually have a little bit of a window open over here, but I'm able to counterbalance it with my own light. Otherwise, I'm often sitting in a completely dark room all day. So thinking about the lighting and not being backlit, the best quality audio you can get. Here's a little tip for you. Our brains will fill in the gaps if the video glitches. If the audio is bad, our brains want to quit. And if we stick it out, we actually stop believing the information and we think the person who's sharing it is not as qualified. So even if people don't hang up because your audio is bad, it doesn't mean they're leaving with the information that you're trying to convey or a sense that you are the person to go to with further questions. So really thinking about what we can do to improve the quality of the audio. So those are the basics: lights, video, and audio. And then beyond that, again, I talked earlier about sort of event design. Purpose first design is something I use. People come into whether it's a meeting, whether it's a virtual program or an event, they come in thinking, feeling, and are doing one thing. At the end, they're going to be thinking, feeling, and are doing another thing. In between is the transformation, being really clear, whether it's you or a team, being really clear on those outcomes. Design with those outcomes in mind. So every time you're saying, should we use this tool? Should we do this exercise? What is the right question to ask in the breakout rooms? It all should be in service of those outcomes. And one of the goals should be engagement, because we're here not just for learning, but for connection. So I think that before the pandemic, I would say, the reason we got on planes and traveled far away to go to conferences was for content and connection. We have the ability to get information from home even before the pandemic.
Yes,
I mean, books
indeed.
have been around a long time, but even podcasts and webinars, they've been around a long time. So having the ability to go online, not just to learn something, but to connect with fellow participants and with this speaker, which it could be a dynamic Q&A, it could be breakout rooms, it could be some other exercise. But I think understanding how to weave that in will really step up people's experience. And now you're going to have this transformative, inclusive, and engaging online experiences, is what is going to get people wanting to come back.
Yeah.
I think, though, honestly, David, it's hard for people to envision what I just described as this amazing thing if they've only been to webinars, which were 45 minutes of death by PowerPoint followed by ineffectual Q&A and no one moderating chat.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you get to this other? So you've got to go and experience other events that are really well done.
Yes.
You have to go see what other people are doing. Like, I used to organize in-person events back before it was called in-person. We just called it events. And I would go to the organization's events that my major donors attended. So if my major donors were likely to also give big gifts to these 2 or 3 other organizations, we swapped tickets. We would just, as organizers, we'd swap tickets, and I'd go to their dinner gala, they'd go to mine, I'd go to their whatever. Because you start going, oh, what are people expecting? What's registration look like? What's the setting on stage? So similarly, you got to go find out what are your friends and competitors doing in this space for virtual, and then figure out how to ratchet up.
It's often the way, isn't it, that people think that their title or their seniority or their expertise trumps everything. It's like, no, listen to me. I'm really expert. You must listen for the next 45 minutes, and that's enough. And I think that's gone a long time ago, but that's still the case for, I'd say, some corporates and some executives. And your point on audio, for example, I'm still staggered how many executives in particular who are running large companies who are not short of a penny or a cent, as we say, still turn up with rubbish audio and rubbish video, and they're presenting themselves and their brand in a way it's like, I can't hear you properly, I can't see you properly. And it's quite staggering. I love your distinction between thinking, feeling, and doing, because that's making it explicit, isn't it? Saying, okay, where do you start, where do you want to go, and how do you design? So if you had to draw out, I want to get a bit more of your magic into this conversation. I mean, you've already shared a lot in a few minutes. If you're thinking about some of your best sessions, best events that you've been designing, perhaps give us a sense of one of the 2 of the aspects of the design where you thought, wow, that just absolutely landed. Beyond the structuring, I'm not trying to get all of your free gifts, but just give the audience a sort of sense of what you can do, as I'm sure plenty of them want to be reaching out afterwards to you.
All right, here's a really, really simple tip. Look at the camera. Next tip. I can't tell you how much that one's important, though. Here's another one. Let people know when they're about to be called on. I call this on deck, but it basically says something like, all right, so in a moment, I'm going to ask all of you to introduce yourselves. Mary, you're going to go first. Let me demonstrate what this looks like. And then you walk through what the introduction look like, name, organization, whatever. And then you say, Mary, now it's your turn. And after you, it's going to be Charles. Charles basically says, I better pay attention to what Mary does. I didn't know that I was about to do this, but now I'm listening and I'm getting ready to unmute. Yes. Now, Mary, because I said her name at the very beginning, she listened very attentively to the instructions and how I demoed it. So she's ready to go. And then after she's done, I say, thank you so much. Now we've got Charles. And after Charles, we've got George. Now, if I want to make this really simple, I could also just mute everybody, look at the participant list in Zoom, and everyone's alphabetical. And I can say, I'm going to go in alphabetical order by first name, or maybe starting from the end of the alphabet from Z, who knows? But people will have a general sense. So if you know that I'm going to go starting with the A's, well, you're like, well, I'm going to be towards the beginning.
It's like you're teeing them up and signaling it and getting them ready, right?
Yeah,
so it's not
they're mentally preparing. Now, in person, you don't have to do this, because in person, it's usually the order is, I mean, the most you decide is if it's a circle, you point at someone and then you just say, and then to your left, or then to your right. But if it's rows, we just point to someone at the end of a row. Well, it's pretty clear who's going next and who's going after that. It's more, it's not a facilitation technique. In the virtual space, we can't assume that people know the order that we have on our screen. That order can also change depending on the software. People come in and out, turn on and off their camera, whatever. And so having a plan, it could be a piece of paper with a list of names, doesn't have to be electronic. We can use the analog. But you know the order you want to go in, and you could have an order that's not alphabetical, but maybe you want to go by department. Having that on the agenda so everyone knows this is who we're going to go to first and who's going to be the one speaking.
Yes.
I remember in the beginning of the pandemic going to an event where someone was sort of almost sitting on the ground, leaning like this, looking at the thing, and all of a sudden they were put in the spotlight and they went. And I was like, yeah, they had no idea we were coming to them. So little things like that go a long way in helping people feel safer in these spaces. So when we talk about creativity, creating a space that has psychological safety is a big piece of that. If people aren't willing to take risks, you're not going to get good creative ideas. So really helping them use the tool correctly. I like doing I do sort of a housekeeping, Zoom orientation at the beginning. And, if there's ever new people, I always say it. Now, if it's the same group that's meeting weekly, you don't have to do it necessarily. But if it's an external meeting and there's always new people coming in, spend a moment saying, here's when the questions will be handled. Here's how you share your question.
Yes.
I like to have people write the word question in all caps in chat and then follow it with their question so we can spot it. Now Zoom has a Q&A feature within Zoom meetings, which you can enable if you want. So you have to just tell people like, this is what we want you to do, or we're going to use the raise hand.
More intentional, right?
Yeah, just being really clear. Here's the thing about this. People have a sense of belonging when they have more structure. The lack of structure makes certain people feel like they know what's going on, and the other people feel like it's all seems like it's random. The people who feel most comfortable when there's not a lot of clear instructions are usually the people from a dominant category. So they're the people who have the native language, they're whatever the dominant culture is in that space. They're the ones who created the culture, so they get it. Anyone who's new, anyone who's younger or older or a person of color or different in some other way, they're left trying to figure it out. And it's a cognitive load to have to figure that out. Whereas if you to say, here's the plan, everybody, and I'm going to remind you, I like to actually, during my presentations, bring the agenda up throughout and sort of have the next section highlighted. It's like a train station. Here's where we're going into next. We just covered that. Any clarifying questions? All right, now we're going to go to this next section. So everyone's constantly reoriented.
Gosh, I'm now thinking of various meetings and so on. I think, gosh, if we had that would have been so helpful. I guess it breaks it up. Again, it makes it easier for people to contribute.
Yes.
And also just makes you, I guess, clear about when you need to prepare, be prepared, and how you can contribute. I mean, you referred earlier to body language.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a number of my clients say, look, I find it really hard to read people virtually, whether that's their facial expressions, their body language, whereas in person, it's pretty obvious. If they're slouching on the table or they literally walk out of the room, it's pretty obvious what they think in most cases. Tell me a bit more about how you either read people's body language or advise people to do so in a virtual setting.
I always encourage cameras on, but I also want to honor that there are times and circumstances when that is not going to be appropriate for an individual person. But culturally, we should encourage them to be on and have it not happen as not the rule, right? But like sometimes that's the case, right? It breaks the rule, and sometimes it's because neurodiversity. It's actually easier for someone to pay attention and be really engaged when they're not on camera. So just recognizing those differences. But are there other ways? The same way I had to learn something at an early age that getting everyone to participate equally is not actually the goal. So, in my mind, everyone had to speak or else it was a failed meeting. And so it was a real learning thing, a really learning to realize that some people are going to participate by listening and then sending you an email after, or you can reach out to them after and say, what were your thoughts on that? Also, are you preparing people ahead of time by giving them the agenda so they can prepare their thoughts if they're an introvert and need to be thinking about their answers? So body language, if the camera's on, you know what? is the person pointing the camera at their ceiling fan and what I call shrimping, which is where they sit down here where their name badge is? I mean, are they doing everything to not really be on camera but still be qualified as camera on? That should say something. You can see people wince. You can see people nodding. I got trained to run masterminds virtually, and she talked about this muscle that when people are upset and they don't want to be upset, they don't want to show they're upset, they clench. And by clenching, like there's just you can kind of see that they're holding themselves, and and usually if someone's really upset, they also might sit really still because they're really just trying to contain the emotion. Yes. And if this is a person who usually is more casual in their body language, and there's something like
they're rigid,
they're seething, or they're really sad about whatever it is, right? I don't want to put words in there, but you recognize that something's off. Now, whether you address it immediately, whether you give them a moment to cool off and you follow up, right? Those are all questions of leadership. But to say that you can't tell, I think that's, people can get up and leave, by the way. I always joke with people that you don't have to turn off your camera if you get up to leave. I've seen an empty chair and it doesn't scare me. And I also follow first date rules as far as what you can eat on virtual. If you would eat it on a first date, go ahead, but you're not going to eat ribs or spaghetti in front of me, or popcorn where you're licking your lips. Brilliant. But generally, if you're finishing up a bite and you're getting on a call, first of all, business meetings over meals is a long time tradition. We have often conducted business over a meal, over a drink. So to now say, no, we have to eschew all of that. We are pristine people who never eat, never use the bathroom.
It's interesting, Robbie, you say that. I mean, I remember a friend of mine, a former client, she was saying that her diary is packed full of meetings, mostly virtual. She said, I just don't have time to eat lunch. And I made 2 suggestions, which are not radical, they're not creative. I said, how about you schedule it? She went, oh yeah, I could do that. I said, how about occasionally you actually perhaps eat some of the lunch if it's a bigger meeting or a webinar or something that you're less leading. I could do that as well. I said, well, how about try it? Okay, I will. Anyway,
you can also schedule a meal with someone. You can
just schedule time in her diary. She'd scheduled no time for lunch.
But I mean, I could even say to you,
from 12 till 2 across.
I you want to book a call with me. It happens to be during a meal time for me. I'll be eating, and then you say, oh, you know what? I'll bring a snack. We can enjoy a meal together, while we're having a call. I think that, again, being creative and open to possibilities. In a lot of ways, this is cinematic, the space that we're creating, whereas in person is theatrical. We have I can't even do the full body here, right? I'm out of the picture. So in person, we've got all the senses. And here we're trying to figure out how to convey something in a really tiny little box where we don't have a lot of movement. But that doesn't mean the message isn't coming across. It doesn't mean we have no body language. It's just that we have to pay more attention. And I think part of this is also teaching our people how to frame. See how I'm sitting and you're sitting, right? So you can see, our chest and up and our shoulders and our head. So if we teach people to all come to a meeting as if they're ready to get on, a mainstream media news show panel, then they'll be ready also as participants to be brought on camera last second to say a question. Whereas sometimes I don't bring someone when I'm producing virtual events. I sometimes don't bring the person asking on because they're just so poorly set up that it would be a detriment to them to have them up next to a speaker who's looking all prim and proper. And sometimes they're great. And I love when I can bring them on because now you got a side-by-side conversation. So show up ready to be on air. That would be my 2 cents.
It's amazing. If it was coming from the consulting world, I often saw 2 sides of people, how they show up for a client meeting and how they'd show up for an internal meeting. And it was 2 different people. It's would you do that? No, but you're not well, treat us as if we're clients, a bit like you're treating as if you're, showing up for a TV interview. I mean, I collated a number of questions from my clients and contacts in preparation for this podcast. Another one that was very common was around, one thing I like about in-person interactions is, after the meeting, we finish the meeting proper, we can sort of walk out, we can hang out, have a bit of a chat on the way out. I can't do that. I miss that in a virtual environment. What can people do to keep that more informal interaction going?
Well, one is you can design your meetings to have that built in. I mean, if it's a weekly meeting, you give yourself a few minutes at the beginning of the call for people to all do a quick check in. I like to have people get on a call, go into breakout rooms with 2 or 3 people, and each share a personal and professional win. And then we come back, we ask for nominations for any particularly awesome, compelling, wonderful wins. And we'll highlight, between 1 and 3 people real brief. Now, that whole thing takes some time, but it's about 6 minutes in the room and about 2 minutes after. But people just are relaxed and energized and kind of a little laugh. They had a moment of laughter. They get to learn about each other. And, so if you pick something like that to warm people up, and maybe you want to put that at the end of the meeting. And it's like, if we are efficient with our time and we get through these points, then we'll have time to do that. Are you overcrowding your agenda? Are you not giving people the agenda in advance so they're not prepared? Like, there's a lot of ways to run more efficient meetings. David, one of the things to think about with purpose first design, should we even be having a meeting? Is this an email? So
yes.
like getting clear on the reason we're meeting. And if part of the reason we're meeting is for that engagement, well, then that's now an agenda item. That's not an afterthought. If it's a virtual meeting, we cannot say we'll do this on the way to the car park, or to the elevator. We have to build it in and say that it's worth it. And does that mean we extend the meeting by 15 minutes? Because we know we're building an engagement. Maybe it's not every meeting. Maybe it's a once a month meeting that we add a little extra time.
Yes,
I would also really encourage people to meet one-on-one virtually. My wife has been part of organizations that have people randomly paired to have a coffee conversation.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Including senior staff. So she was a new employee and got to meet with the VPs one-on-one for a 15-minute chat. And what a great way to kind of be brought into a culture that felt like doors were open, people want to chit chat, get to know each other, show you who you are in the world. So it doesn't all have to happen in a group setting. You can encourage the culture of set up 15, 20, 30-minute calls. We can randomly assign them for you. You can sign up to be on the list or not on the list that month, depending on your workload. I think virtual has one of the benefits of virtual is how easy it is to get on a call and like meet with each other regularly. Whereas if I only see someone once a year at a conference, it's a lot harder to establish a relationship. So it's not just for internal communication. I'm also thinking about external partners, prospects, colleagues in the industry. Like, how do we nurture and sustain those kinds of connections?
I remember in the early days of the pandemic when things shifted all virtually, many of my former colleagues and other consultants I know said, look, it's okay. This is okay for people I know, current clients, but it's harder for prospects. And I just reminded them, I'm not trying to be smug, but I reminded them, we've been working in hybrid for years, well before the pandemic, and we've been developing relationships with people overseas. Yes, we did fly in more, but there's a mental shift, which is it's got to be harder. So there's something about getting over these myths, getting over these things that are just wrong. And I guess what I'm hearing in this conversation is there's so many options you can play with, but it does require, intention, careful design, and a focus on keeping it real, keeping it interesting, keeping it human, as opposed to some robotic, dry, technocratic conversation, which frankly is not some form of meeting anyway. It shouldn't be there. I mean, if best, it should be an email, as you said.
I'm going to add to that. I'm going to plus one that. One is in-person did not make meetings better. Meetings as a rule are not good because most of them are not thoughtfully designed and don't have an advanced agenda. No one's facilitating, no one's timekeeping, and no one's keeping track of action items. There's no follow-up after the meeting about who's doing what, and there's no review of what was said last time, right? This is like, by default, meetings are not well designed, and in-person is not better. So sometimes a reset, like having to move to virtual, causes people to rethink the design of a meeting. One more thought. In-person has limitations. We don't talk about this. The fact that we literally have to all be in the same geographic location means that there are conferences that last no more than 3 days, no matter how much content, because we cannot ask people to spend more than 2 nights away. And I've gone to conferences with 42 concurrent sessions. No one's going to tell me that's a great design. I've gone to conferences that take over an entire city. where I had to decide whether to go to the next session based on whether I could physically get to the 1.2 miles away in the 20 minutes allotted. Right.
Wow.
That is not a great
Oh, I
design.
remember that post. You showed your shoes, didn't you?
Yeah. No one ever complains, though, about this. Like, we don't go, oh, South by Southwest is this enormous conference here in the States. And no one ever says, oh, can you believe how big it is? And we've got to go from one end of the city to the other.
That's a great point.
Do you mean I have to fly there and actually stay there for 2 nights? So there are limitations. I work with clients who've committed to a virtual gathering because they can include way more people. I have clients in California. California is a very big state. Before the pandemic, they were meeting in Northern California for one meeting and in Southern California for another. And now they can have one virtual meeting and more participants from each organization can come. So it used to be maybe one would come. Now they can send 5 or 6 virtually. There's no travel costs. There's no time away from family. And they can get speakers literally from around the world. I helped them connect with a friend in Australia. And my friend in Australia worked for a very little bit of her fee in exchange for coming. I was like, I think she'll be great. Really have her. I'm going to encourage this connection. She would never have gotten on a plane and flown from Australia to California for that rate. And so I think it opens up, again, some amazing possibilities, but we can't be doing that boring, just read from the slides, next slide, read from the slide, next slide. We can't keep doing that.
Very good. You covered so many topics. The last one that comes up regularly is around difficult or sensitive conversations. It may be me giving difficult feedback, there's a performance issue, or there's something's going wrong, or something's going wrong somewhere. Any tips for people in terms of how to have that type of conversation virtually? Because people feel, I know people feel more uncomfortable. They'll feel uncomfortable generally, but feel more uncomfortable doing that virtually.
I mean, just setting aside time. I'm not actually sure what the question is because they're uncomfortable with the situation, period. Make sure there's no distractions, make sure people's doors are locked. You might want to convey to people that, I want to really do a check-in about your performance. Like, you might want to give people a heads up so they are not distracted, multitasking with kids in the background.
Yes.
Because we're now having people join from home, that's probably the biggest factor. If they're joining from some place that is not just a offsite office, if they're coming from their home that happens to have an office in it, then we have to really have those considerations of, is this a space where they can focus on this conversation? And if the timing has to be adjusted to allow for that when the kids maybe are at school or there's another adult at home, that kind of thing, or maybe you're going to ask them to meet you from a different location in order to have that privacy. That's the kind of considerations, because once they're on the call, you don't want them to be suddenly disrupted. But otherwise, absolutely. I just think, speaking to them, I had a facilitator who, she didn't want to take my instruction. So she did this. Like, we were looking at her forehead the whole time while she was murmuring, oh, yeah. And it's like, but what we saw was just the top of her head, right? It wasn't that great. So really being aware of like what you're putting across, and also it's not really about you. Like, I got to tell you, as the person who's having to have the difficult conversation, if you make it about your own angst, you're doing a disservice to the person you're trying to support. If you're actually trying to guide them on the path, either, move them up or move them out, right? Whatever direction they're going, you're there to hold space for that conversation to happen so they can hear it, hopefully learn something from it, and continue on their day, whichever direction.
That's such a good way to put it. As we draw to a close, I always ask questions about the guests. So there's a few questions here where around one is, look, you've had to learn a lot over a short period of time, having been from in person to that pivot to being virtually. But what's the one biggest change you've made, perhaps in the last few months, in your own facilitation and or design?
Well, I've been constantly trying to grow and iterate. To me, it is important to constantly get 5% better. And so I like to see what other people are doing. I host a lot of events to try things out. I mean, I've been able to do some really incredible work with clients where we're doing manually assigning people to breakout rooms based on different topics. Like, and this is really exciting for me because it's something I think would be really hard to replicate in person. But people choose based on the U.S. Census, race and ethnicity, and we had people coming into Zoom rooms based on that. We had 300 people choose the white room based on how they answer the census. And then within that, I had to put them in 30 breakout rooms with a trained facilitator. And then for the second 30-minute discussion, they chose one of 6 topics. And we basically asked them to do that. And then based on how they answered, I then got them in groups of 10 based on specific topics with a facilitator. And to think about how to take that into in real life, the size of the room or the number of rooms, the cacophony of noise, how loud and warm would that room be? We're all trying to talk. How would people get to the right table on time? How many latecomers would there be? How would people even know where to go? Like, it just feels like logistically very, very challenging.
Yes.
And it just required planning, designing the flow so that I had enough time to do the manual thing, and I've got it down to a science where I can do it in about 12 minutes, 300 people. So,
That's fantastic.
At first this was like, I could never, like, this is the kind of thing I could not have envisioned. And now I just like matter of course, it's like, oh yeah, we can do that. Here's how we would do it, So,
I love that.
I think
I love how you learn,
thinking
and
really
you're
creatively,
always wanting to grow the extra 5%, which I think is fantastic.
5%.
And when you're having your best day, your absolutely best day, what are the practices or conditions that help you?
Getting a good night's sleep is definitely one of them. I'm definitely not always good at getting to bed at a reasonable time compared to when my alarm goes off. So being more disciplined about that and starting out with a good breakfast, knowing what I have in my day and making sure it's not overpacked with meetings. I really enjoy a balance. I've been trying to see if I can have similar activities on a similar day, so that my brain doesn't have to shift between types of work. And it doesn't have to be on the same, like, it could be research across 3 projects, but it's research.
Yes, I get it.
Or it's meetings. Like, I try to have my coaching clients meet with me all on the same day so that I'm in that mindset. And sometimes that's not in my control. I've also gotten better. I don't book calls by default. I don't book calls Mondays and Fridays, which gives me some open space for last minute calls with clients. And if no one has a last minute call, I now can basically on Sunday, I start blocking that free time with the things I want to get done. But I know that, like, I have flexibility within that. So I think my best days are when I have a keen sense of what I have to get done and the time available to do it and the energy to do it.
I love how intentional you are. It doesn't always work out, but you're intentional about how you want to work, what you want to focus on, and what outcomes you're looking to deliver. I think that's inspirational. And at a bigger level, what impact are you looking to have on the world around you?
Well, I wrote this book, Break Out of Boredom, Low-Tech Solutions for Highly Engaging Zoom Events. One, because I want to attract event clients to work with so I can help them do the strategic design and the training of their speakers and produce their virtual events. But probably the bigger goal is that I need virtual to not only be an option, which some people stop thinking of it as an option when in real life started becoming a possibility. I need to not just be an option. I need people to recognize that sometimes it is the optimal option.
Yes.
And that only happens if generally speakers, facilitators, and trainers elevate how they approach virtual programming. So it was my gift to the industry, to the world, to give people all of my IP from the last 3 years, everything I've learned, so they can all start DIYing. So in every level. So you showing up as a speaker, more prepared. Maybe you have a checklist you walk in with now saying, here are the settings I need. Here's what I want to make. I want to make sure I'm on 10 minutes or 15 minutes early to do this green room checklist that I have. You controlling a little more of how you show up, even when an organization doesn't do it for you. You saying, here's what I need to be prepared. Because if you were walking into any hotel chain, right, and you got on stage and discovered last minute that there was no projector, you would look foolish. Not the organization, because you're the one standing on stage going, oh, I was going to have slides, but there seems to not be a projector here because you didn't have a checklist. Did you confirm that? Did you check on it as soon as you got in the room? Like, these are the things that as virtual presenters, we cannot relinquish our responsibility. And we need to, just like we would in person, have an AV writer, a required list of AV. And that for me includes the settings, because I need to be able to reach for a setting and have that feature enabled. So that's the stuff that I think, bigger picture, I just want more people on every level, whether they're hosting, they're speaking, they're facilitator, trainer. I want everyone to just kind of elevate how they approach this, because then I think more people are going to knock on my door and ask for my help to bring things to life. If
Works for everyone.
virtual is boring, then they're not going to even think this is possible.
I love how you describe that. It's more than an option. It's about being an optimal solution. And as I said, I've read the book, and literally within minutes, I started changing how I was working. I thought I was reasonably good. I'm not probably good, not great. So I can vouch for it. Robbie, you said a lot in a short amount of time. You shared a lot, and I appreciate your generosity to me, to this audience. Where can people find out more about you, your work, your books, and your services?
Well, if you go to breakoutofboredom.com, you can get access to the book. It'll take you to amazon.com, but you can also find it on .co.uk or .com.au or anywhere else. Basically, it's on Amazon. But if you go to breakoutofboredom.com, you can download the bonus resource library, which are checklists, step-by-step guides, 30 plus videos. I sort of give you a lot of tools from the book in a printable format. And there's even one bonus in there that I mentioned in the book, but I show you how to do in the bonus content. RobbieSamuels.com is the home of everything else I do in my business, all 3 of my books, my NPR interview that I did last year, like all of my media, all my other bonus content, everything that I do. So I'm a business growth strategy coach. It's a small percentage of my business, but I love what I'm doing with clients. And then I am, virtual event design consultant and an executive Zoom producer. My team and I are here to help keep your team less stressed and create greater participant engagement.
Absolutely. What a stimulating conversation, fun conversation. You've dispelled some myths. You've given some new strategies, some tips. You've shared your own experience. Wow, absolutely fantastic. Thank you ever so much. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please do check out the other episodes in the series. Sign up to the YouTube channel and to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, give me a lovely rating. Robbie, thank you ever so much again.
My pleasure.